What happens when airport security targets the wrong person, mistaking a Federal Air Marshal for just another difficult passenger? This is a story about power, prejudice, and the devastating consequences when discrimination meets federal law enforcement. Before we dive into this incredible tale, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you believe in accountability and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more powerful stories that expose the truth. The Seattle-Tacoma International Airport hummed with its usual morning chaos, a symphony of rolling luggage wheels, boarding announcements, and the constant chatter of thousands of travelers making their way through one of the nation's busiest transportation hubs. The harsh fluorescent lights reflected off polished floors still damp from the overnight cleaning crews, and the air carried the familiar mixture of coffee, fast food, and industrial cleaning supplies that defined airports across America. Maria Rodriguez walked through Terminal A with the measured pace of someone who had navigated countless airports throughout her career. At 38, she possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of federal law enforcement training and real-world experience that most people could barely imagine. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore a simple black jacket over jeans and comfortable walking shoes. To the casual observer, she looked like any other business traveler catching an early morning flight to Denver, nothing more than another face in the crowd of anonymous passengers. But Maria Rodriguez was far from anonymous. She was a Federal Air Marshal with the Transportation Security Administration, one of an elite group of armed law enforcement officers who flew undercover on commercial flights to prevent hijackings and terrorist attacks. Her badge and credentials were tucked discreetly in her jacket pocket, her service weapon concealed beneath her clothing in accordance with federal protocols that required air marshals to blend seamlessly with regular passengers. This morning's flight was supposed to be routine, a standard assignment on United Flight 1247 to Denver International Airport. Maria had reviewed the passenger manifest, studied the flight route, and conducted her usual pre-flight security assessment. Nothing had raised any red flags, no credible threats or suspicious activity reports. It should have been just another day at the office, invisible protection for 200 passengers who would never know she was there. She approached the TSA security checkpoint at Gate B, joining the growing line of early morning travelers. The checkpoint was already busy despite the early hour, with business travelers eager to catch their flights and vacation-goers starting their journeys. Maria watched the familiar choreography of airport security unfold before her, passengers removing shoes and jackets, laptops emerging from bags, the endless parade of personal belongings disappearing into X-ray machines. At the front of the checkpoint stood Agent Thompson, a 15-year TSA veteran who had built his reputation on being thorough, aggressive, and uncompromising in his security procedures. At 42, Thompson carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed his uniform granted him unlimited authority over anyone who entered his domain. His pale blue eyes moved constantly, scanning the crowd for potential threats or passengers who might challenge his authority. Thompson's philosophy was simple: everyone was potentially dangerous until proven otherwise. He took particular pride in his ability to identify suspicious passengers, often relying on what he called professional instincts, but what others might recognize as profiling based on appearance, ethnicity, or behavior that didn't conform to his expectations of how travelers should look and act. As Maria reached the document checking station, she handed over her driver's license and boarding pass to the TSA agent, a younger woman named Jessica who processed them with routine efficiency. The documents passed inspection without incident, and Maria moved toward the main security checkpoint where Thompson waited. Something about Maria immediately caught Thompson's attention, though he couldn't articulate exactly what it was. Maybe it was her calm demeanor in an environment where most passengers showed at least some anxiety. Maybe it was the way she carried herself with quiet confidence despite her casual attire. Or maybe it was simply that her appearance triggered the unconscious biases that he had never acknowledged or examined throughout his career. Whatever the reason, Thompson decided that Maria Rodriguez warranted special attention. "Ma'am, step over here please," Thompson said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had become second nature after years of directing passenger traffic through security checkpoints. He gestured toward a secondary screening area away from the main flow of travelers. Maria looked at him with mild curiosity but no concern. Secondary screenings were common in airport security, especially for passengers traveling alone or those who triggered random selection protocols. She had experienced them countless times in her personal travel and understood they were a routine part of the security process. "Is there a problem with my documents?" Maria asked politely, following Thompson's direction toward the secondary screening area. "Just need to verify a few things," Thompson replied, his tone already carrying an edge of suspicion that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "Empty your pockets completely and place everything in this bin." Maria complied, removing her wallet, keys, and cell phone and placing them in the gray plastic bin. She was careful to avoid any sudden movements or behaviors that might escalate the situation, drawing on her law enforcement training to remain calm and cooperative while mentally cataloging Thompson's behavior. Thompson examined each item with exaggerated thoroughness, spending far more time than necessary reviewing her driver's license and boarding pass. He held the documents up to the light, studied the security features, and cross-referenced the information multiple times as if searching for evidence of forgery. "Where are you traveling today?" Thompson asked, though the information was clearly displayed on her boarding pass. "Denver," Maria replied, maintaining her patient tone. "Business trip." "What kind of business?" Thompson pressed, his questions moving beyond the scope of standard security screening procedures. Maria hesitated for a moment. Her actual business was classified federal law enforcement work that she couldn't discuss with airport security personnel who weren't part of her operational chain of command. "Consulting work," she replied, which was technically accurate though incomplete. Thompson's eyes narrowed at what he interpreted as evasiveness. In his experience, passengers who were vague about their travel purposes often had something to hide. His suspicion level immediately escalated, and he made a mental decision to subject Maria to the most thorough screening possible. "I'm going to need you to step through the millimeter wave scanner," Thompson said, directing Maria toward the advanced imaging technology machine that could detect concealed objects on a passenger's body. This was where Maria's situation became complicated. As a Federal Air Marshal, she was authorized to carry her service weapon aboard commercial flights. Her firearm was properly holstered and concealed according to federal regulations, and she carried the necessary documentation to verify her law enforcement status. However, the standard protocol was to notify TSA supervisory personnel of her presence before going through security screening. In the rush of her early morning departure, Maria had made a critical oversight. She had forgotten to complete the standard notification process that would have alerted checkpoint supervisors to her status as an armed federal law enforcement officer. It was a procedural mistake that she realized too late to correct without creating exactly the kind of scene that air marshals were trained to avoid. Maria stepped through the millimeter wave scanner, knowing that her concealed weapon would immediately be detected by the advanced imaging technology. The machine's computer screen displayed the telltale outline that indicated a metallic object in the area where her service pistol was holstered. Thompson's reaction was immediate and aggressive. "Ma'am, step back through the scanner and keep your hands visible at all times," he commanded, his voice rising in volume and authority. His hand moved instinctively toward his radio as he prepared to call for backup. "Sir, I can explain," Maria began, her voice remaining calm but urgent. She reached slowly toward her jacket pocket where her credentials were stored. "I'm a federal." "Don't move," Thompson shouted, cutting her off before she could complete her explanation. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Do not reach for anything." The commotion immediately drew the attention of other TSA agents and passengers throughout the checkpoint area. Conversations stopped, heads turned, and the normal flow of security processing ground to a halt as everyone focused on the dramatic confrontation unfolding in the secondary screening area. Additional TSA agents converged on the scene, including Supervisor Patricia Wells, a seasoned administrator who had worked airport security for over 20 years. Wells approached with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to handling crisis situations, but even she seemed taken aback by the intensity of Thompson's response. "What's the situation, Derek?" Wells asked, positioning herself where she could observe both Thompson and Maria. Concealed weapon detected, Thompson replied tersely. Passenger was attempting to reach for something when I stopped her. Possible threat situation. Maria realized that the situation was spiraling beyond her control. The standard protocols for identifying herself as a Federal Air Marshal required calm, professional interaction with supervisory personnel, not a high-stress confrontation in front of dozens of witnesses. However, she also understood that any sudden movements or attempts to access her credentials could be misinterpreted as threatening behavior. "Ma'am, I need you to turn around and place your hands on the wall," Supervisor Wells instructed, her voice carrying the authority of her position. "We're going to conduct a security pat-down and determine what you're carrying." Maria complied with the instruction, recognizing that resistance would only escalate an already volatile situation. As she placed her hands against the wall, she spoke in a clear, calm voice that she hoped would cut through the tension. "I am Federal Air Marshal Maria Rodriguez. My credentials are in my left jacket pocket. I am authorized to carry a firearm aboard commercial aircraft." Thompson scoffed at her statement, his skepticism evident in his tone and body language. "Right. And I'm the Secretary of Homeland Security. Ma'am, making false claims about federal law enforcement status is a felony offense." Wells motioned for Thompson to step back while she conducted the pat-down herself. Her hands quickly located Maria's service weapon, properly holstered and secured according to federal regulations. She also felt the outline of Maria's credential case in her jacket pocket. "She's definitely armed," Wells confirmed, her voice carrying new concern. "And she's got what feels like an ID case in her jacket." "Could be fake credentials," Thompson interjected, his voice carrying certainty despite having no evidence to support his assumption. "We've had training on people who impersonate federal agents. This could be exactly that kind of situation." Maria felt her frustration growing but forced herself to maintain professional composure. The situation was being handled exactly backwards from established protocols, with TSA agents making assumptions about her identity rather than following proper verification procedures. "Supervisor Wells," Maria said, her voice carrying new urgency, "I need you to contact TSA Federal Security Director Michelle Park immediately. She can verify my identity and status. This situation needs to be resolved quickly because I have an operational assignment on Flight 1247 that cannot be compromised." Wells hesitated, clearly uncertain about how to proceed. On one hand, Maria's demeanor and specific knowledge of TSA procedures suggested she might indeed be a federal law enforcement officer. On the other hand, Thompson's concerns about impersonation were not entirely unreasonable, and the consequences of making the wrong decision could be severe. "Derek, call Metro Police," Wells decided. "We need law enforcement here to sort this out properly. If she's really federal, they can verify it. If she's not, they can arrest her for impersonation and weapons charges." Thompson's face lit up with satisfaction as he reached for his radio. This was the kind of high-profile security incident that would demonstrate his vigilance and professional competence to his supervisors. In his mind, he had potentially prevented a serious security breach by refusing to be fooled by an elaborate impersonation scheme. "Metro Dispatch, this is SeaTac TSA checkpoint requesting immediate law enforcement response," Thompson spoke into his radio with obvious relish. "We have a subject claiming to be federal law enforcement, armed with a concealed weapon, attempting to board a commercial flight. Possible impersonation and weapons violations." As they waited for police arrival, a crowd of curious passengers and airport employees began to gather at a respectful distance. Some held up cell phones, recording the unfolding drama for social media. Others whispered among themselves, speculating about what kind of threat had been detected at the security checkpoint. Maria realized that the situation had moved far beyond a simple procedural misunderstanding. Thompson's aggressive response and Wells' decision to involve local law enforcement had transformed a routine security screening into a potential career-threatening incident that could compromise her operational effectiveness and damage her reputation within the federal law enforcement community. More troubling was the growing realization that Thompson's behavior seemed driven by something beyond professional security concerns. His immediate assumption that she was lying, his refusal to follow standard verification procedures, and his obvious satisfaction with the dramatic escalation suggested that implicit bias might be influencing his judgment. Within 10 minutes, 2 Seattle Metro police officers arrived at the checkpoint. Officers David Chen and Rebecca Martinez approached the scene with the professional demeanor of law enforcement personnel accustomed to handling airport security incidents. Both officers were experienced in dealing with the complex jurisdictional issues that often arose when federal, state, and local authorities intersected in airport environments. Officer Chen took the lead in assessing the situation. "I understand we have someone claiming federal law enforcement status," he asked, addressing both Wells and Thompson. "That's correct," Thompson replied eagerly. "Subject is armed and claiming to be an air marshal, but we believe the credentials are fake. She was acting suspiciously during screening and refused to comply with security procedures." Chen looked at Maria, noting her calm demeanor and professional bearing. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name and agency affiliation?" "Federal Air Marshal Maria Rodriguez, Transportation Security Administration," Maria replied clearly. "My credentials and badge are in my left jacket pocket. I'm assigned to Flight 1247 departing at 9:15 a.m. Chen nodded and looked at Wells. "Ma'am, have you examined her credentials?" Wells looked uncomfortable. "We were concerned they might be fake. Agent Thompson felt it was safer to call you for verification rather than risk being deceived." Officer Martinez stepped forward. "With your permission, ma'am, I'd like to examine your credentials," she said to Maria. Maria nodded her consent. Martinez carefully reached into Maria's jacket pocket and withdrew a leather credential case bearing the official seal of the Transportation Security Administration. Inside was Maria's federal badge and identification card, complete with her photograph, badge number, and the distinctive security features of genuine federal law enforcement credentials. Martinez examined the credentials carefully, comparing the photograph to Maria's face and checking the security elements that would be difficult to counterfeit. After a thorough inspection, she looked up at Officer Chen and nodded. "These appear genuine," Martinez announced, her voice carrying across the checkpoint area. "Federal Air Marshal Maria Rodriguez, TSA badge number 2847. The effect of her words was immediate and dramatic. Thompson's confident expression collapsed into confusion and growing concern. Wells closed her eyes momentarily, recognizing the magnitude of the procedural failure that had just occurred. Surrounding passengers and TSA agents began murmuring among themselves as the implications became clear. Maria felt a mixture of relief and righteous anger. Relief that her identity had finally been verified, but anger at the unprofessional treatment she had endured and the potential compromise to her operational security that had resulted from Thompson's prejudicial assumptions and procedural violations. Officer Chen addressed the group. "Federal Air Marshal Rodriguez, I apologize for the confusion. TSA personnel, you need to understand that Federal Air Marshals are authorized to carry firearms aboard commercial flights and have priority clearance through security checkpoints. This situation should have been handled very differently." Thompson's face flushed red as the reality of his mistake began to sink in. Not only had he detained and humiliated a federal law enforcement officer, but he had done so in front of dozens of witnesses and created exactly the kind of public spectacle that airport security was supposed to avoid. "I was just following security protocols," Thompson said defensively, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "We can't just take everyone's word that they're federal agents." "Actually, you weren't following protocols," Officer Martinez corrected. "Standard TSA procedures require that when someone identifies themselves as federal law enforcement, you immediately notify supervisory personnel and begin verification procedures. What you did instead was assume deception and escalate to law enforcement without proper cause." Maria finally spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of her federal position. "Agent Thompson, your behavior throughout this incident has been unprofessional and potentially discriminatory. You made immediate assumptions about my credibility without following established verification procedures. Your actions have compromised my operational security and created an unnecessary public incident." Supervisor Wells stepped forward, recognizing the need to address the situation before it escalated further. Marshal Rodriguez, on behalf of TSA, I apologize for this incident. Agent Thompson's actions were not in accordance with our standard procedures for handling federal law enforcement personnel. This goes beyond procedural failures, Maria replied, her voice steady but firm. Agent Thompson's immediate assumption that I was lying, his refusal to follow verification protocols, and his obvious satisfaction with creating a dramatic scene suggest that bias may have influenced his judgment. This incident will need to be reported through appropriate federal channels. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with passengers pulling out phones to record the confrontation. Maria realized that her operational cover had been completely blown, making it impossible for her to complete her assigned flight in an undercover capacity. The incident had effectively ended her ability to function as an air marshal on Flight 1247. Officer Chen made a decision to clear the area. "Everyone needs to move along," he announced to the gathered crowd. "The situation has been resolved. TSA personnel, please resume normal checkpoint operations." As passengers began to disperse, Thompson found himself isolated and exposed. His colleagues looked at him with expressions ranging from sympathy to disapproval, and he could see supervisory personnel already beginning to discuss the implications of what had occurred. Maria retrieved her credentials from Officer Martinez and prepared to leave the checkpoint area. Her morning flight was no longer an option, both because her cover had been compromised and because she would need to file formal reports about the incident with her federal supervisors. Marshal Rodriguez, Supervisor Wells called out as Maria prepared to leave. "Is there anything we can do to help resolve this situation?" Maria turned back, her expression serious but professional. "Supervisor Wells, this incident will be reported to Federal Security Director Park, TSA Headquarters, and the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General's Office. Agent Thompson's conduct will be subject to federal review, and this checkpoint's procedures for handling federal law enforcement personnel will need to be examined and corrected." Thompson's remaining confidence evaporated as he realized the full scope of the consequences he was facing. What had started as what he thought was vigilant security work was now a federal incident that would be investigated at the highest levels of the Department of Homeland Security. As Maria walked away from the checkpoint, she could hear Thompson beginning to offer explanations and justifications to Wells and the other supervisors who had gathered around him. But his voice had lost its earlier authority and now carried the desperate tone of someone who realized his career might be in jeopardy. The incident at the security checkpoint was just the beginning of what would become a comprehensive federal investigation into systemic problems within TSA screening procedures and the implicit bias training of security personnel. Maria's professional reputation would ultimately be enhanced by her handling of the situation, while Thompson's career would never recover from the scrutiny that followed. Within hours of the checkpoint incident, news of the confrontation between a TSA agent and a Federal Air Marshal had spread throughout Seattle-Tacoma International Airport and beyond. Cell phone videos taken by passengers had already been uploaded to social media platforms, showing Thompson's aggressive behavior and Maria's calm professionalism as the situation unfolded. Maria spent the remainder of the morning in a conference room at the airport's Federal Security Office, providing detailed statements to TSA investigators, Department of Homeland Security officials, and representatives from the Air Marshal Service. Each interview required her to recount the incident in meticulous detail, documenting every aspect of Thompson's behavior and the procedural failures that had allowed the situation to escalate. Federal Security Director Michelle Park arrived at the airport personally to oversee the investigation, recognizing that the incident had serious implications for TSA's relationship with other federal law enforcement agencies. Park was a 25-year veteran of federal security services who had built her reputation on maintaining high professional standards and ensuring proper coordination between different agencies operating within airport environments. Marshal Rodriguez, Park said as she entered the conference room where Maria was completing her statement, "I want to personally apologize for what you experienced this morning. The behavior you encountered is not representative of TSA's professional standards or our respect for federal law enforcement personnel." Maria looked up from the incident report she was completing. "Director Park, my concern is not just about the personal treatment I received. Agent Thompson's immediate assumptions and aggressive behavior suggest systemic problems in how TSA personnel are trained to interact with federal law enforcement officers and potentially with passengers who don't fit their preconceived notions. Park nodded grimly. She had already reviewed the preliminary reports and cell phone footage of the incident, and she recognized that Thompson's behavior went beyond simple procedural mistakes. The immediate assumption of deception, the refusal to follow verification protocols, and the obvious satisfaction with creating a dramatic confrontation suggested deeper problems that would require comprehensive investigation. We'll be conducting a full review of Agent Thompson's employment record, including any previous complaints or incidents involving similar behavior, Park assured Maria. We're also implementing immediate retraining for all checkpoint personnel on proper procedures for handling federal law enforcement officers. While Park and Maria discussed the investigation, Thompson was undergoing his own series of interviews with TSA internal affairs investigators. Unlike Maria's professional and cooperative demeanor, Thompson's responses were defensive and increasingly desperate as he realized the gravity of his situation. "I was just doing my job," Thompson insisted for the fourth time during his interview with internal affairs investigator James Morrison. "We're trained to be suspicious of everyone who comes through the checkpoint. How was I supposed to know she was really federal?" Morrison looked at him skeptically. "Agent Thompson, you're trained to verify credentials when someone identifies themselves as law enforcement. Instead, you immediately assumed deception and escalated to a public confrontation. Can you explain why you chose not to follow standard verification procedures?" Thompson struggled to articulate an answer that wouldn't expose his prejudicial assumptions. The truth was that something about Maria's appearance and demeanor had triggered his suspicion in ways that he couldn't professionally justify. She hadn't looked like what he expected a Federal Air Marshal to look like, and her calm confidence had struck him as suspicious rather than professional. "She was acting suspicious," Thompson replied weakly. "The way she answered questions, her whole attitude. It didn't seem right for someone who was just a regular passenger." "But she wasn't claiming to be a regular passenger," Morrison pointed out. "She identified herself as a Federal Air Marshal and requested that you verify her credentials through proper channels. You chose instead to assume she was lying and call local police. Can you explain that decision?" As Thompson struggled to defend his actions, security camera footage from the checkpoint was being reviewed by federal investigators. The videos clearly showed Maria's cooperative behavior throughout the screening process and Thompson's increasingly aggressive treatment of her despite her calm compliance with his instructions. The footage also captured the moment when Maria attempted to explain her federal law enforcement status, only to be cut off by Thompson's shouted commands to keep her hands visible. To trained investigators, it was obvious that Maria had been trying to de-escalate the situation by providing proper identification, while Thompson had prevented her from doing so through his aggressive behavior. By late afternoon, preliminary findings from the investigation were beginning to take shape. Thompson's personnel file revealed a pattern of complaints from passengers about overly aggressive screening procedures, with several incidents involving accusations of profiling based on ethnicity or appearance. While none of the previous complaints had resulted in formal discipline, they established a pattern of behavior that gave context to the morning's incident. More damaging was the discovery of social media posts from Thompson's personal accounts that contained disparaging comments about airline passengers and federal government employees. While not explicitly discriminatory, the posts revealed attitudes about authority and professionalism that were inconsistent with TSA's standards for public-facing personnel. Director Park called a meeting with Thompson and his union representative to discuss the preliminary findings. The atmosphere in the conference room was tense as Park laid out the evidence that had been gathered during the day's investigation. "Agent Thompson, based on our review of today's incident and your employment history, we've identified serious concerns about your adherence to TSA procedures and professional standards," Park began. "Your treatment of Federal Air Marshal Rodriguez violated multiple policies and created a significant security incident that has attracted national attention." Thompson's union representative, a veteran TSA employee named Robert Walsh, attempted to defend his client. Director Park, Agent Thompson was following his training to be vigilant about security threats. The fact that the passenger turned out to be federal law enforcement doesn't negate his responsibility to verify credentials properly. Mr. Walsh, Park replied firmly, Agent Thompson didn't verify credentials properly. He assumed deception without evidence and escalated to law enforcement without following standard procedures. Moreover, his behavior pattern suggests this wasn't an isolated incident but part of a larger problem with his professional conduct. As the meeting continued, Thompson's position became increasingly untenable. The combination of procedural violations, documented complaints, and inappropriate social media posts created a compelling case for disciplinary action that could end his TSA career. Meanwhile, Maria was completing her own meetings with federal investigators and preparing to return to her home base. The incident had effectively ended her operational assignment, but it had also positioned her as a key witness in what was likely to become a significant case study in airport security procedures and implicit bias training. Marshal Rodriguez, Director Park said as they concluded their final meeting, "I want you to know that this incident will result in meaningful changes to how we train and supervise checkpoint personnel. Your professional handling of an extremely difficult situation has helped us identify serious problems that need to be addressed." Maria nodded, appreciating the acknowledgement but still troubled by the broader implications of what had occurred. Director Park, "My concern is for the passengers who don't have federal badges to protect them from this kind of treatment. If Agent Thompson was willing to behave this way toward a federal law enforcement officer, how does he treat regular travelers who can't defend themselves against abuse of authority?" It was a question that would resonate throughout the investigation and ultimately lead to reforms that extended far beyond a single checkpoint at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The evening news cycle picked up the story with dramatic footage of the morning's confrontation, leading to national discussions about airport security procedures, federal law enforcement coordination, and the persistent problem of bias in government agencies. Thompson's face appeared on television screens across the country, though usually pixelated or blurred to protect his identity while the investigation continued. For Maria Rodriguez, the incident marked a turning point in her career. While she had successfully completed hundreds of air marshal assignments without incident, this single morning at a security checkpoint had elevated her profile within federal law enforcement and positioned her as an advocate for procedural reform and bias prevention. For Derek Thompson, the day marked the beginning of the end of his TSA career. The weight of federal scrutiny, media attention, and internal investigation would prove to be more than his employment could survive. Within weeks, he would be facing termination proceedings and considering whether his future lay in airport security at all. The broader implications of the incident continued to unfold over the following weeks and months. TSA implemented new training programs specifically focused on interactions with federal law enforcement personnel, and checkpoint procedures were revised to prevent similar incidents from occurring at airports across the country. Congressional oversight committees requested briefings on the incident, and it became a case study in federal law enforcement training programs nationwide. The cell phone footage taken by passengers became required viewing in diversity and inclusion training sessions, demonstrating how quickly professional situations could deteriorate when bias and assumption replaced proper procedures. Maria eventually returned to active duty as an air marshal, but her experience at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport had changed her perspective on the challenges facing federal law enforcement officers who didn't fit traditional expectations of what agents should look like. She began speaking at training conferences and professional development sessions, using her experience to help other federal personnel navigate similar challenges. The incident also sparked broader discussions within the Department of Homeland Security about the need for better coordination between different agencies operating in airport environments. New protocols were established to ensure that federal law enforcement officers could identify themselves properly without compromising their operational security or creating unnecessary confrontations with security personnel. 6 months after the checkpoint incident, Derek Thompson was formally terminated from his position with the Transportation Security Administration. The investigation had revealed not only the procedural violations from that morning, but also a pattern of inappropriate behavior toward passengers that made his continued employment untenable. Thompson attempted to appeal the termination through his union, arguing that he had been following his training and that the incident was an unfortunate misunderstanding rather than deliberate misconduct. However, the combination of documented evidence, witness testimony, and his own statements during the investigation made his appeal unsuccessful. In the aftermath of his termination, Thompson struggled to find employment in airport security or any other field requiring interaction with federal law enforcement personnel. His name had become associated with the incident through media coverage and professional networks, making him effectively unemployable in his chosen field. The incident had also taken a personal toll on Thompson's family relationships and community standing. The national attention and social media coverage had made him a symbol of bias and abuse of authority, leading to social isolation and financial stress that compounded the professional consequences of his behavior. For Supervisor Patricia Wells, the incident served as a wake-up call about the importance of proper leadership and oversight in security operations. While she was not terminated, she faced significant criticism for her handling of the situation and was required to complete additional training on federal coordination procedures and bias prevention. Wells ultimately used the experience as a learning opportunity, becoming an advocate within TSA for improved training and better procedures for handling complex security situations. Her career survived the incident, but it was forever marked by the recognition that her decisions on that morning had contributed to a serious breakdown in professional standards. The broader TSA organization implemented comprehensive reforms based on the lessons learned from the Seattle incident. New training programs emphasized proper verification procedures for federal law enforcement officers, and checkpoint personnel received enhanced instruction on recognizing and preventing implicit bias in their interactions with passengers. More significantly, TSA established new oversight mechanisms to ensure that individual agents couldn't single-handedly escalate routine screening procedures into federal incidents. Supervisory personnel were given more authority and responsibility for intervening in situations where agents appeared to be acting beyond their proper scope of authority. The incident also led to improved coordination between TSA and other federal law enforcement agencies operating in airport environments. Regular meetings and joint training exercises were established to ensure that personnel from different agencies understood each other's roles and procedures, reducing the likelihood of future conflicts and misunderstandings. For Maria Rodriguez, the long-term impact of the incident was largely positive. Her professional handling of the situation and her subsequent advocacy for procedural improvements enhanced her reputation within the federal law enforcement community and opened new opportunities for career advancement. She was eventually promoted to a supervisory position within the Air Marshal Service, with responsibilities that included training and professional development for other federal agents. Her experience at the Seattle checkpoint became a central component of the curriculum she developed for handling challenging situations while maintaining professional standards and operational security. Maria also became a sought-after speaker at law enforcement conferences and training events, sharing her experience and insights on topics ranging from bias prevention to federal agency coordination. Her message consistently emphasized the importance of proper procedures and professional conduct in maintaining public trust and ensuring effective security operations. The incident at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport ultimately became a landmark case in federal law enforcement training and airport security procedures. It demonstrated how quickly professional situations could deteriorate when proper procedures were abandoned in favor of assumptions and bias, and how individual actions could have far-reaching consequences for entire organizations and systems. The cell phone videos from that morning continue to be used in training programs years later, serving as a powerful reminder of the importance of treating all individuals with professional respect and following established procedures even in challenging or unexpected situations. For Derek Thompson, the incident marked the end of one career and the beginning of a difficult period of personal and professional reflection. His name became permanently associated with a failure of professional judgment that had national implications, serving as a cautionary tale for other security personnel about the consequences of letting bias and assumption override proper procedures and basic human respect. The story of Maria Rodriguez and Derek Thompson became more than just an airport security incident. It evolved into a broader examination of how bias and assumption can undermine professional institutions, and how individual courage and proper procedures can help prevent systemic failures from causing lasting damage to public trust and safety. Years later, when asked about the incident during interviews and speaking engagements, Maria would reflect on the broader lessons it represented. Derek Thompson's actions weren't just about one man's mistakes, she would say. They revealed how institutional bias can compromise security operations and undermine the coordination between federal agencies that keeps our transportation system safe. The real victory wasn't just holding him accountable, it was creating systems that prevent similar incidents from occurring and ensure that all passengers are treated with professional respect regardless of their appearance or background. The Seattle checkpoint incident stands as a powerful reminder that federal law enforcement officers, like all citizens, deserve to be treated with professional respect and that proper procedures exist to protect both security operations and individual rights. Thompson's assumptions about Maria Rodriguez based on her appearance didn't just constitute unprofessional behavior, they compromised airport security and undermined the cooperative relationships between federal agencies that are essential for effective transportation security. The story serves as a testament to the importance of proper training, professional conduct, and the courage to stand up for proper procedures even in the face of aggressive behavior from those who are supposed to protect and serve. Maria's refusal to be intimidated, combined with her thorough documentation of Thompson's misconduct, created accountability that rippled through the entire transportation security system. More importantly, it demonstrates that meaningful change is possible when individual acts of courage are supported by strong institutional oversight and a commitment to continuous improvement. The reforms that followed the Seattle incident have made airport security more professional and equitable for all travelers, ensuring that similar incidents are far less likely to occur. What do you think about Marshal Rodriguez's handling of this discriminatory treatment? Let us know in the comments below, and if you believe in accountability and justice in our transportation security systems, make sure to like this video, share it with others who need to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that expose the truth about power, prejudice, and the consequences of our choices.